Hello everybody, welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. I saw this video on Moist Critical's YouTube channel the other day where Charlie and Matthew were drinking different whiskeys, trying to see if expensive whiskey was a scam compared to cheaper whiskey. I love when larger YouTubers or streamers make videos like this because it's always that they like hate whiskey or they really love whiskey but then they pick the cheapest one. It's always a really funny thing, but they always almost have the same common misconceptions, and I'm here to lend some insight into what they got wrong, as well as suggest some different whiskeys that I think they actually might like. So let's get into it.
Are you a big whiskey guy? I know the answer.
Yeah, I do not like whiskey.
I would go as far as to say I hate whiskey.
I don't know if I'd go that far.
I can't stand it.
I'd say that most people aren't fans of whiskey when they first try it out. Now, most people are going to be having like Jack Daniels as their first one, or maybe Johnny Walker Black, which unfortunately is very smoky and most people aren't going to love that flavor. So the idea of these guys not liking whiskey without really delving into it is totally common.
Here, this is Michter's barrel-proofed rye.
I fucking hate whiskey.
Starting off with rye is a bold choice, especially a barrel strength rye, which just means it's going to be higher ABV. It's kind of, they don't change it too much after it comes out of the cask, so it's going to be almost as high ABV as it can possibly get. You can proof things down using water and make it lower alcohol content, but whatever. So in the case of rye, you're usually going to have very herbal or medicinal flavors. And these are things, just think of like the way that grass smells after you've recently clipped it. That's a good smell, except make it kind of like wet and like mildewy almost, and if you have a young rye, that's totally what it could taste like. The flavor can be very off-putting for people who don't love that, and at best you're going to be getting kind of like a spicy flavor that can be very imposing as your first drink of the day. I can't tell if the guys had anything to drink prior to this. I know when I film my videos, I'm usually doing a couple before I drink because it makes filming easier, but it also just cleanses the palate a little bit. But having a high ABV rye as your first drink, no wonder they didn't like it. Also, minor nitpick, I guess, but this is called Michter's, not Michter's, which every time I heard that, it was killing me inside.
Not the Michter's.
Need to know.
Is that blasphemous? I thought Kentucky was only bourbons. They do just
I think
normal
bourbons
whiskeys.
can only come from Kentucky, but Kentucky's allowed to produce other things.
Rectangle and a square, right, guys?
This is a super common misconception, and one of the reasons I decided to make this video. Bourbon does not have to come from Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's not going out of its way to convince you that this is not true, but legally, it just has to be made of 51% corn in the mash bill, which is basically the recipe of grains that go into the whiskey. Just has to be 51% corn, have some new charred oak barrels, and a few other legal requirements that I won't bother going into here, but you could make bourbon in your backyard if you really wanted to. In fact, I have 2 bottles here from New Hampshire, and another 2 from Texas, which is actually making fantastic whiskeys nowadays, and all 4 of these are great. They're all bourbons, and I've got a half a dozen, if not more, back behind me as well from various different states.
When babies are sick, they're like, put your thumb in some whiskey and suck on it, that kind of thing. You want to put your thumb in my mouth with some whiskey on it?
Who has ever said that?
I don't think I need to tell you not to put whiskey in your baby's mouth, but people did used to actually put brandy or whiskey on their thumbs, and they would put it on teething babies because they thought that it would numb their gums the same way it kind of does with normal alcohol. Don't do this. Alcohol's bad for babies. Duh.
They have a batch number on
That's
this.
what I
That's
was thinking
gotta
too.
be bougie.
Yeah, there's only so many of these that they have to tell you which number
Yeah.
you got.
It's a great marketing strategy and it totally works. The idea is, do you really love this one whiskey? Sure, okay, cool, then let's do a batch of it every year so you have a limited release. We can charge a lot more for it. It will be a little different and it does typically taste better, but that's the idea. So you've got things like Larceny, where if you really like Larceny, now you've got 3 more of them a year that you can do because they put out 3 different ones of these. And then you have other companies like Barrel, where they put out all these different batches. This is actually batch 34, which is one of their best ones. And the idea is we wanted a specific flavor, so they went and made that flavor, and that's batch 34. Mostly you're gonna see this in bourbons, mostly because bourbons are huge right now and they're trying to suck all the money out of it that they can. But Scotch does this, so does Irish, like everybody does this. Scotch, Ardbeg is actually very popular for doing this lately. Every year they do kind of a weird release. In this case, this is the Heavy Vapors, and it was pretty much a part of their still broke. And before it was replaced, they were like, oh, this tastes different than normal, let's bottle it up. And now there's only a few hundred of these, and maybe a couple thousand tops, and that's the idea.
Do you think 107 is the batch number, or do you think it's like...
I think it's the type. I think the whole thing is a Weller 107.
Gotcha.
The Weller 107, totally a good guess, thinking it might be the batch number or something, especially coming off the Stag Junior. But in this case, it is the proof. This is 53.5%. And I will just say, I wasn't going to put this one in here, but if you do happen to buy Weller, which honestly I don't suggest you do, but 107 is one of the better ones in my mind. You know, they all taste pretty good, but they're all just so far blown out of price range because of the secondary market and what Pappy Van Winkle did to the whole bourbon industry. But Weller 107, pretty good bet.
All right, that one was really strong.
There's a lot of range in whiskeys.
It makes sense that they think this one's a bit stronger when in reality the ABV is a lot closer to the first one, which they didn't really comment too much on. The problem is that the first one was a rye, so the flavor was probably overtaking rather than the ABV. The second one was well aged, and when you're dealing with bourbons, you are going to dull the fierceness of the ABV with age. In this case, it's not as well aged, and you're going to taste the ABV more.
Flip them.
Flip.
30.
Whoa!
Oh.
The price on this one is supposed to be $50. Actually, all the Wellers are supposed to be around that price. It was made to be kind of an affordable whiskey. And the idea that they thought that this was $50 is actually pretty awesome because they nailed it.
This is the best whiskey by far.
No, Japanese
It's not
whiskey
even close.
actually goes crazy.
That's not even close. That is definitely the best one so far.
This makes a ton of sense given all of the other opinions on the whiskeys that they provided, because basically you are talking a very clean and crisp and light whiskey at 80 proof. It's only 40% ABV, so it's not going to have the bite that the other ones did. It's not going to have the heavy oak influence that all the bourbons did. It's not going to have the herbal flavors that the rye did. Basically, it's just going to taste like a nice, easy to sip fruity drink. Not fruity in the way that like a cocktail would be like fruity drink, but it's got a lot of nuance to it that is going to be things like apple, orange, lemon, pear, apricot, anything like that. Just think like fruits that grow in trees.
That's a little.
That's smooth. Yeah, who, 10-star, who?
Ancient age.
Was
Ancient.
the person who rated it dead?
I love that even 5 whiskeys in, they can tell that this stuff's garbage.
Aren't one of these worth
Matt,
4
that's such a
figures? Somebody
crazy-
told me that.
That's a crazy number for a bourbon, especially because you are less than a third of the way there. It is $3,299.
Pappy Van Winkle is the king of overrated bourbons, and I will kind of get on my soapbox now at this point. I just don't get it. And the fact that this is a $3,000 bottle, their price is not wrong. It's a little higher than probably what I would pay here, but not by a whole lot. And a lot of that has to do with buying it on the secondary market. Basically, you can't get these bottles, which is part of the scarcity is building a higher price. But then you also have people on the secondary market knowing that people are looking for this. So now you have supply and demand coming in. Some people have it, demand is high, you're gonna charge as much as you possibly can. And it's hit kind of this critical mass of now not only is it, I just want to try this, maybe I'm willing to spend a few $100s on something that should be about $120, but instead now I also want it as a status symbol, so how much can I spend on that whiskey? Now part of this became this way because there was this huge news story where a whole bunch of Pappy Van Winkle was stolen, and that kind of brought it into even a wider audience, so now even more people want to try it, know it's scarcer. The fact that Weller is as expensive as it is because it shares a mash bill with Pappy Van Winkle, and people are like, oh, well, I can't afford the Pappy, I'll buy the Weller. And so now what literally was a $25 bottle of the Special Reserve is now going for like well over $100. That Weller 107 that I showed you earlier, that is easier to find at about 150 than it is at 100, and it should be 50. All of these things are completely blown out of proportion. The guys are lucky to have tried this one, but frankly, I don't think that if you didn't tell them how much it costs, I don't think that they would have liked it either. And frankly, I've tried it, not a fan.
Yeah, there's a difference between whiskey with an E and no E.
A whiskey and a whiskey.
Yeah, that's how you can say it. Whiskey.
Okay.
Most of the world leaves the E off of the word whiskey, and a big reason for that is because most of the world just wants to copy Scotland. So when you're talking US or Ireland, we are adding the E, and that's totally fine. There's one notable exception here, and that's Maker's Mark, which is one that you've probably heard of. It's in most bars. They only have the Y, they don't have the EY, and part of that is because Maker's Mark has a Scottish heritage, so that makes sense. But in general, if you're in the US, use an E. If you're in Ireland, use an E. Everywhere else, leave out the E.
How long must a whiskey age in Scotland to be considered a whiskey?
The rules for aging whiskey completely depend on which country you're in. In Scotland, it is 3 years. In the US, it depends. It's usually about 2 or 4, or it could be more depending on what you want to put on the label. But a funny story I wanted to tell you guys about is a few years ago, Pabst Blue Ribbon, PBR beer, they ended up making a whiskey, and it's an unaged whiskey. So what you're seeing here is a totally clear whiskey because all of that color is coming from the barrel. But they wanted to kind of of stretched the limits of what the law defined whiskey as. So in order to call whiskey whiskey in the US, it has to be aged in a charred oak barrel, and there's some definitions there too. But they never state how long. So they actually even have on the label, it says aged 5 seconds. So what they did is they built this little contraption that pretty much spiraled the whiskey around in the inside of the barrel and then dumped it, and then they later bottled it. So this whiskey has touched the barrel for 5 seconds is the idea. And I think it's awesome. I think that Aaron did a really good job putting together the trivia and everything. I actually was scrutinizing the questions because I was kind of hoping that maybe you got one wrong, but as far as I saw, nothing was wrong, so good job. Charlie and Matthew, you guys did a great job kind of guessing at these things. Starting off with high ABV is really tough. Would have been interesting to hear you guys attempt to give any sort of notes of what you were tasting. Just would have been really funny because most of the stuff would have just been over-oaked to all hell. I've put together a list of whiskeys that I actually think the guys will like. There's only 5 on here because in my mind, once you hit 3, 4, or definitely 5, you're not picking up any nuance and you're basically just drinking to drink, which is super fun too. But here's a list that I think you guys will really like, and if you're a fan of their channel, make sure you tag them in this stuff so that they see it. If you guys decide to take me up on this challenge, random YouTuber, right? But if you take me up on a challenge, if you buy these, you can get all 5 of these for under $300 total. If you like them, give me some credit. If you don't like them, I will come on here and I will drink one of my worst whiskeys, bottle chug a little bit on the camera for you guys. All right, but you gotta be honest. Cool, we're gonna start off Glen Grant 12. This one is a Scotch. It is very light, very crisp, it's lemony. It's gonna be kind of similar to that Japanese whiskey that you had, except in my mind, a little better. I know that was a 30-year-old Japanese, but frankly, like, yeah, we'll talk about Japanese another time. In this case, the Glen Grant 12 is a great representation of an intro Scotch. There's not going to be a ton of complexity. It's going to be a very easy drink. If you want to, throw an ice cube in this one just to kind of chill it out a little bit, and I think you'll like it even more if you didn't like it right to start. The order here, by the way, totally going to matter, so do this one first. Next one is going to be the Jameson Black Barrel. This is, think regular Jameson, and a lot of people don't love Jameson because there's like a coppery feel to it. This does not have that. This is everything good about Jameson and nothing bad about it, and then exemplify or improve, make the better parts better. All right. Everything about this, delicious. Next, we've got Glenellicky 12. This is a sherried finished Scotch, which means that you took Scotch that you already really liked, and then you put it into X wine barrels, which held sherry, and that's gonna give it a lot of flavors of kind of, we call it red fruits, right? But things like strawberries, plums, which are kind of not red, but then you also have strawberries, plums, cherries, sometimes you get like some apricot in there, a lot of just red wine flavors mixed with whiskey. It's like a match made in heaven. Okay, next we're gonna have Bunnahabhain. Bunnahabhain is going to be this is the 12. This has kind of a different side than this. The idea is that this tastes floral. It's not going to be like your rye where you taste herbal. It's going to be floral, which is more of like a delicate flavor. Again, this is going to be a very easy one to drink. If you decided to put a little bit of ice with this one, I won't be upset with you, but in general, you're gonna love this. And the last one here, the only one that I think you might not love just based off what you've already tried, but it's such a tried and true solid bourbon that I felt like I wanted to recommend it anyway, and that's gonna be the Four Roses Single Barrel. This is about $50 for anybody out there who's curious, and I'll put some stuff on the screen so you know what everything's worth. This one is, in my mind, one of the kings of single barrel bourbons. It's 100 proof, I believe. I don't think this one's higher. Yeah, 100 proof, so 50% ABV. It is going to taste a little bit oaky, but not overbearing like what I think you already had. The ABV is well hidden with the age of the whiskey, and they've blended several things together to make sure that this is everything that you want it to be. Try all 5 of these. I think you'll love it. If anybody out there wants to learn more about whiskey, I'll put a video over here that you guys can check out. And thank you for watching this. Definitely make sure to tag the guys in this so that they see it. And I hope to see you here on the Whiskey Dictionary. Cheers.